Another thing that I wanted to talk to you about was the Bible. Not all translations are created equal. When we look at the manuscripts of the Old Testament, they're in Hebrew and Aramaic, and the New Testament are in Greek. So we have to deal with the copying of the manuscripts separately. The Hebrew Old Testament is copied by people that were the best educated people of the land. They were given a lot of preparation beforehand with education and a number of other things. And another thing that happened is each day before they went, they had a bunch of preparation. You can argue whether the preparation was efficacious in some way, but they had about 2 hours of preparation before they would go and do any copying. So they're not just waking up and trying to do things kind of first thing before breakfast or something, and the error rate is higher. So there's prayers and ceremonial washing and clothing they needed to wear to do the job. And then there's a known passage that they would copy in a day that they knew that they could copy, and then do the checking afterwards. So in this certain passage that they would copy, they had a known number of characters, words, letters, spaces, and then how many of each letter, Aleph, Beth, Beth, Shopheth, and so on. And any variance in the numbers from the original to the copy, they'd look to see where the problem was, and if it was a minor problem, then they would scratch it out and they'd put the correction in so that people would be aware. And if it was a more significant variation that occurred because of some reason, then all your day's work would be set on fire and burned up because it wasn't good enough. So the error checking in those days was between CRC 8 and 16. You might know about the cyclic redundancy check for data transmission, and the higher the number, the greater the reliability. And I thought that was pretty good because the COCO, the color computer, made a major significant difference while it was running. The programs updated and they were using CRC 4 to begin with, and then they went to 8. And it's a big deal because programs ran more reliably, and you didn't have to download them again if it didn't work. The issue was with line noise, and something could get added into the data as it's being transferred with the modem. And so I'm sure you've done this, to take a phone off the hook while a fax is coming in and into the phone and see what it does to the fax. You get some very interesting results, how it makes the information that's received, it's destroyed, and it's really a mess on the fax. They don't have the error checking with the fax that they did with a data stream where a cyclically redundancy check is doing, so it changes the characters that are received. And computers at the time are not powerful enough to get to that level and to transfer data to. So in the 1980s, computers became powerful enough to do CRC 16 checks routinely. So what that meant was that the Hebrews had better error control for over 2,000 years than computers did up until the 1980s. You probably know that CRC 64 is used for encrypted data streams. Errors occur. If errors occur in an encrypted data stream, you're losing more than one packet, because the encryption of one packet, the key for the next packet is in the first one. So if this one is destroyed somehow, then you're not going to be able to unpack this one on down. So you need to have far better CRC control. So the Old Testament was the domain of the Jews. They do the data integrity work and we benefit. And there's some evidence that supports how good they were, because the book of Isaiah and the Dead Sea Scrolls, dating back to the time of the Qumran community, it's the same as the present one. So there is no issue with the Old Testament. The New Testament is a different situation. There's two lines of manuscripts. The ones coming from Syria, 5,321 manuscripts, or 5,288, depending upon who you're reading and when. But it's a fairly significant number of manuscripts, and they all read the same. At best, they have something like a 0.5% variation with the words "the" and it should be this or something like that. So that purports, or that comprises about 99.2% of the manuscripts that are available. The other is the Alexandrian. There are 3 manuscripts that are full, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. And then there's something like 40 minuscules. So you'll have a portion of a book, or maybe 1 or 2 verses, or even a part of a verse. So these read far more differently than the majority text, the Syriac text that we talked about first, and you can't go more than about 2 verses, and these manuscripts will even disagree with each other. So there's far higher variance among these Alexandrian manuscripts that are said to be older than in the majority text, and then there's massive selections that are deleted. One of the manuscripts is called Codex Sinaiticus. It was found by a man named Tischendorf in a burning barrel, and the question is, why do people put stuff in there in a burning barrel? I've known a couple people in my life that have elaborate filing systems in their garbage can, but each of them wound up with a very bad problem at some point in time when some well-meaning person came along and emptied the garbage out, and there went income tax and important emails that needed to be kept and so on. They got just pitched, and most people would hold that if something is in the garbage can or is to be burnt like this, that there's a reason why it's there. So Tischendorf, we only got about 43 pages of this manuscript, and between it and the majority text there's 18,000 changes in it, and that's, like I say, not all the verses that are in the majority text are found in these. And we get after the Mormons for having 10,000 changes in their Book of Mormon between 1830 and 1981, and with the Sinaiticus, there's 18,000 changes in it, and then let's look at what it does with the Old Testament. It has Genesis 20 to Genesis 24:16, Numbers 5 to 7:20, Ezra, Nehemiah, a part of Psalms, Jeremiah, Lamentations, and Joel to Malachi. So there's many books missing. And when we look at, like I described, the Jews have a system that we're declaring known good because it's been subject to external verification with the Qumran community and other things like that. So we know that what should be in the Old Testament, and we're not seeing it in this. And many verses in the New Testament are deleted as well. And 1 Corinthians 13:1, there's a deletion in the middle of the verse, and these deletions are marked that they're not found in the most reliable older manuscripts. Well, these manuscripts are older, but we're not certain that they're the most reliable based on what we see and another of the manuscripts is Vaticanus. No Protestant scholar has seen it, and it disagrees with Sinaiticus in 3,000 places. And it's missing in the Old Testament. We know that it's missing Genesis 1 to 46, Psalm 135 to 137, and then it's missing Hebrews 9:14 on. So we test what we look at what we can test, and we test the Old Testament because the Jews know what they're supposed to have, but these guys are missing massive chunks, and it's deficient in this area, and that's certainly a problem. And so, from 9:14 on, so we're seeing 1st and 2nd Timothy missing, Titus, Philemon, and the book of Revelation is missing. And the books or the Bibles that are based on the Alexandrian text have them in, and they're including stuff from other from the majority text to fill in, because these books should be there. So which view is right? We'll pick on Dr. Wilbur Pickering and the Identity of the Greek New Testament text. It's put out by, I think it's Thomas Nelson. I met this man, and he's a rather interesting sort. We never talked much about this, but this is his master's in linguistics thesis that's been rewritten and dumbed down and made. They've attempted to make it more readable for the average man. To be honest, when we got into the Lower Testament criticism in chapter 4, it got really heavy for me, and I got bogged down and haven't been able to get much past that in that chapter, but I went on to read some of the others. So we agree that there are no original manuscripts that the various people wrote, but it is possible to determine what the original looked like. So he's done a statistical analysis of the text to show families and genealogy. So somebody changes the to this, or vice versa, the ones after that, they see that, but they know that other manuscripts that don't have that, that are older, they can trace it back and they can say it was reliably this way in the original. So he's agreed, or his research has showed that the majority text is closest to the original, and with the different readings it's possible to statistically figure out what the original looked like. His thought was that the manuscripts are not permanent and the originals were disposed of when a good copy was available. The other way to look at things is the way that Bart Ehrman does. He's saying that it's not possible to determine what the manuscripts look like. So I'm contending that when we look at this picture, Bart Ehrman has got rid of 99.2% of the dots on the diagram and is trying to draw a line, and it's not working. I think that he's gotten rid of stuff unnecessarily, because when you look at the majority text, this other 99.2% that's up here, and what we're seeing a dramatically different pattern than what we're seeing down here. And he's drawing his conclusion on this and has gotten rid of this. And what he's saying flies in the face of what others have said, and he's not the only one that has said things like this, and they've been roundly denounced by history and by critics along the way. The Bible is trustworthy, especially when it's compared to other books, and we've talked about this in the past, the number of books and the age between books, the original and when manuscripts are found. And I've put up a chart for you in the past about this, the number of books, the number of originals, and the date in between with some of the others. And some of the people, they know the writings of Plato, for example, because it was one copy of his writings found 1,000 years after he had written it or something like that. So we have much more clear pictures to the contents of the Bible than we do with some of these other people. And then I mentioned before about Westcott and Hort, and I've shown separately that it was not possible for them to use the Westcott and Hort method for determining New Testament content. So this idea of newer and better manuscripts, they were all rejected until about 100 years ago. And why is that? There's a number of people, like I say, that have been aware of these before that, but they've just been looked at in the last number of years. And then I say, look at what's happened to the Old Testament in their manuscripts. We know what it's supposed to look like because the Jews are responsible for keeping that, and then we've taken it from them. So they know what it should look like. And in the Alexandrian manuscripts, there's so much that's missing, and there's so much that's wrong. And we have to test what we know and what we can test, and then use that as a measure of how to look at the rest. And it just doesn't match up properly.